Howdy, and welcome to the Aggie Teach Momentum podcast, brought to you by the Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences program at Texas A&M University. I am your host, Kenrick Davies, former high school physics and astronomy teacher and current program manager for Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences. This podcast is meant to provide a little more insight and information to those seeking a secondary teacher certification in Texas. We aim to provide episodes that help pre-service educators on the path to certification, as well as leverage the experience of myself and other guest speakers to support teachers in their first few years in the classroom. And today's topic is going to be a really great one. It is going to be a conversation with some of our current Aggie Teach students, some of our current teacher candidates about their experience with preparing for their content and pedagogy certification exams. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves since we do have a crowd here on camera today. But broadly, our topic is about preparing for certification exams. And so how about I'm going to call you out so we don't talk over each other. Alyssa, why don't you start?
Hi, my name's Alyssa. I am year 2026. I major in English and I'm getting certified in 7 through 12 ELAR.
Awesome. Julianna, how about you?
My name's Julianna Dublin. I'm a mathematics major, class of 2026 as well, and I'm working towards my math 7 through 12 certification.
Awesome. Parker, you're up.
Hey, I'm Parker Doucette. I'm a history major at A&M, and I'm getting my social studies certification to be a class of 2025.
Abigail, go for it.
Hi, I'm Abigail Wilson. I am also class of 2026, and I'm a chemistry major, hoping to get my certification. Well, I have gotten my certification in 7th through 12th chemistry.
Awesome. Okay, great. Welcome. I know that a lot of times our podcast pulls in, veteran teachers or people in the field who've been around, but I always love being able to highlight the work that our current students are doing so that we can share experiences and prepare the students that are coming in after you guys. So first question, though, is a broad question, and that is, why do you want to be a teacher? What is exciting you about getting into this profession? Whoever wants to start, just go ahead and jump in.
I can go first. I feel like I'm from a family of educators, so I kind of saw what that would look like day to day, and I really just wanted something where I could make an impact. I wanted to have a job where I felt like it was super meaningful. So after looking at like my mom and my aunts, just seeing how big of an impact they made, I feel like that would be a really good opportunity for me to just help kids. I know high school is like a time where a lot of decisions are being made. It's super stressful sometimes. So just a time to like offer support and guidance for a lot of different people is really what drew me into being a teacher.
That's great. I love the sentiment about making an impact. It's one of the fun things that I get to talk about on the recruitment side is like, if you really want a profession that's going to make an impact, this is going to be one of the best ones out there. Who else?
I think the arc of my life has always sort of bended towards teaching. I didn't really want to be a teacher till, I don't know, I think I kind of actually voiced the thing when I was probably about 20 years old. But I think it was kind of always there. I always loved like knowledge in its per se, but I just loved kind of discussing that stuff and kind of sharing with other people when I felt like I could add something to a conversation, and it always felt really good for me when I could know that I taught someone something. And so that, and plus I really love interacting with kids. They're very fun people. It kind of all just came together, and I was like, I would love to be a teacher one day, and then here I am.
Here you are. Yeah. Similar for me. I came into college and did not even have it on my radar to be a teacher, to be honest, and I kind of fell into it and have been loving it ever since. So, Alyssa, how about you?
Yeah, I kind of have the same idea towards working with children. I think kids keep you young. And I always heard like to be a good teacher, you always have to kind of keep that child inside of you alive to kind of remember how it was. I think kids are really smart. And sometimes when they're, like picking their nose and being weird and everything, it's easy to forget that, but they're really smart. And I think it's an honor to be that person that kind of takes all their creativity and shows them how to use it for good and shows them that they are smart and, they can achieve these great things in life. And I think it's one of the only things that I'm always actively excited about. And I don't think I can ever get bored of that.
Abigail, a little bit of a different question, just because we've had three people share, and so we've got a lot of ideas out there. What are you looking forward to most in your future classroom?
I feel like I'm looking forward to most helping students kind of have fun with learning. I think once you get into high school, there's this pressure. I know I felt it as someone that was taking all these APs and like it's really not that deep now that I'm like a senior in college. I'm like, I could have chilled out a little bit, but I think it's like they feel this pressure to interact with school is something that's really stressful and they have to prove themselves and all these things. And it's true, like there are things that's going to be stressful and they're going to have to apply themselves. But I think there's so much that you can learn and have fun with learning that I feel like is lost in all of the chaos of everything that is like going on in high school of like standardized testing and all these things. So I think that's something that I'm really looking forward to is making learning fun and having them grow into lifelong learners, which is a cheesy line that we always hear, but I think it is really true of like there's so much that you can do to encourage students to learn, even if they're not like if your subject isn't their favorite subject to be in. So
It's great. It's a little cheesy, lifelong learners, but I feel like if you're not going to be a lifelong learner, then you can't be a great teacher. So I think all of us probably have really bought into that idea of constantly learning more in order for our students to see the value in what it is that we're teaching. Whether or not it's their favorite subject, hopefully they at least see value in it, right? I knew I was never going to create a whole classroom full of physicists, but I was hoping that they got a few nuggets out of there that would help them, learn that you should pull this way instead of this way if you're trying to do some manual labor, right? I mean, it's just a little bit of nugget there here or there. But I love it. I love the sentiment here. I love that you all have a drive and a passion to really work with students and help them through a difficult time, as you all have said, in their life, and provide a pathway, a path forward to whatever their dream is. I think that's just really the awesome impact of a teacher. So thank you for making the choice to be in education. So our topic, right? Let's bring it back around to our certification exams, right? So broadly here in Texas, you as a secondary level certified teacher have to pass two exams, right? One is going to be your content exam. So all of you are getting certified in something a little bit different, which is why I pulled this group together for this particular podcast. So we have a math, we have science, we have a history, we have an English. We have a content exam, but then later we'll also talk about a pedagogy exam, the PPR. But let's talk about the content one first. Since you all have taken that and passed the exam, I want to know what stressed you out the most. What was the big stressor in preparing for that content exam? And Julianna, I'm going to pick on you because I know we've had conversations about this. What stressed you out most about taking your math content exam?
So mine, which is kind of a unique situation, the biggest stress for me was the time aspect. So I needed to take my practice exam on 240 tutoring in a semester that I chose to take over winter break. So I had 2 weeks to do all of the modules and take my practice exam. So that was super stressful for me, which again is not everyone's experience. But then after that, I chose to take my actual exam over spring break. So in the middle of a semester where I'm working on my course load, trying to still study for the exam. So just all of that combined just made it more stressful for me anyway.
I totally get that. And I'm going to take a break here and provide a little bit of context because we know that, of course, this is meant for current students in Aggie Teach, right, to learn a little bit about our process. But just in case anyone else is listening, so 240 Tutoring is an online software that we use here at Texas A&M that helps students prepare for their content exams. And it has modules, practice tests, flashcards, quizzes, right? Like it's all of this preparation for that. So you're saying that was a lot to pack into a short period of time?
Yeah. So mine, like the math was, I think it was 32 different modules. So it covered 32 different topics of math, which I am lucky. Math builds off of itself. So it's not like I'm starting from scratch with every single topic, but it was a lot of stuff that I hadn't learned in a long time. So just trying to remember all of the older stuff on top of the stuff that I wasn't as good at, and then just managing that with my major coursework as well. It just ended up being a lot more time than I had thought it was going to be.
Gotcha. Okay. So others in the group, similar experience, different experience, managing the added weight of the preparation along with your current course load, being a university student? What other experiences that stressed you out?
By the point that you're taking your content exam, like you've taken a lot of your coursework for your degree. And so for me, like with chemistry, I was in these very upper level courses that had kind of veered away from general chemistry, which is what I would have to teach in high school. So I think having to distill what I knew back down to like what you need to know for high school was difficult, and then reviewing those things. 'Cause I think one thing that I noticed is like there's a lot of like nuclear chemistry on there. I was like, I haven't touched that since high school, frankly. So I was like, I need to relearn this and figure out how to do it. So I think just, yeah, being in these upper level classes, you're like, oh, I'm so smart, I'm taking PChem. But it's like now I have to go back and remember how to do like, yeah, random stoichiometry. You're like, I forgot how to do this. But it's
Right.
a little bit of
It,
what Julianna was saying.
so math and science definitely are those like ones that build. And so you're taking 400 level classes at the university, but you're going to be tested over something that's more high school related. Okay, what about your ELAR and social studies? I know, you do get deeper and more in depth in your degrees as well. Did you kind of have similar experiences both in social studies and ELAR?
I was gonna say, I personally, with the actual content of it, I feel like what I learned from high school, the like foundational skills in English, I continued in college, not with like as like simple as it was in high school, but it's just every concept got there was a lot of like unlearning simple things, like the whole like 5 paragraph formatting for an essay was something I really had to unlearn when coming to college. So it was like reminding myself that I'm teaching seventh graders to 12th graders and I'm not teaching college students, and they do have to follow a certain format that maybe I haven't done in a long time. So it was just kind of like not an unlearning, but reminding like you have to build foundational skills before you reach the college level. The part that stressed me out the most with the ELAR exam is that there's a written portion of it. And with 240 tutoring in specific, it gives you a lot of feedback on your multiple choice section, but with the writing section, I didn't get any feedback besides the grade. And so I think it's 0 through 6. I could be wrong, but it just gave me like the letter grade with like no actual written feedback on what I'm supposed to change about it. So that was kind of left me at like, okay, I didn't do that well. I don't really know what to do about that.
Yeah. Yeah, that
Um,
makes sense. So
yeah,
did you have a university faculty member maybe that you were able to talk with it through with this?
yes, thankfully, it was over the summer, so I had to do a lot of like over online, but that wasn't a big issue. And I kind of went over what I had written originally for my practice exam, and then also the actual Pearson website had a lot of resources of like examples of what they're supposed to look like, so I can kind of in my own time compare my writing to their writing, and then that ended up being really helpful, and I was able to pass it pretty well.
Great. Awesome. Okay. Parker, social studies. What's your
So,
experience?
one unique stressor for social studies is uh, there's two what is it certifications you can get in this kind of area. It's the history and then social studies, and the difference is social studies. Well, first off, you're going to be more employable after having done it, but it includes government, economics, and psychology. I believe there might be more, but so there's a lot of different areas that you kind of have to cover when you're studying for all that kind of stuff. And like for me, you don't know how well you particularly know all these different fields because you have that on top of like world history, Texas history, geography, all that of it. So you don't. That's what 240 tutoring kind of helps you because it shows you which areas you're strongest in, and so you're like, okay, I'm gonna go run through these flashcards and read through these articles again to make sure I'm more well versed on it. One of the stressors is that you're having to do it during a semester, and
Yeah.
your brain is gonna tell you, 240 tutoring, you can leave that to the last like 5 weeks of the semester. That'll be a way better time than right now, and so a lot of it can pile up if you're not on top of it. So there's my
That makes
advice.
sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, I mean, as opposed to our math and science where they build, right? Social studies seems to be a lot of isolated topics that don't necessarily correlate, although they do, and you can make those correlations, but maybe not in a test form. So you're right, right? Social studies is a composite certification. So you have economics, government, world history, U.S. history, Texas history, social, what am I missing? Sociology, psychology, right? There's a whole bunch of a different one. I think there's a little bit of anthropology thrown in there. So there's a whole lot of isolated topics that make that difficult, as opposed to, say, the history exam, which is still very similar in terms of you got world history, U.S. history, European history. I mean, there's a lot of isolated topics there as well. So very unique stressor to the social studies, certainly. So if we're going to talk about the actual content that's on the test, then let's get into those topics that you remember seeing a lot of, right? So we've already broadly talked about how it's really not your 400 level content that you're getting in your degree. So what were those topics that you saw a lot of on your test? And I guess I'll throw a disclaimer out here that the test shifts every time it gets administered. So whatever you hear here as being an emphasis area may not be an emphasis area that you see. But Abigail, how about you with chemistry? What was the topic that you saw a lot of? You mentioned stoichiometry. Was that it, or was it something else?
Yeah, it was kind of like I mean, chemistry is a lot of math. So it was a lot of math principles of like, you need to know fractions, you need to know how to do some stoichiometry and things like that. I remember there were a lot of like making sure you understand fundamental particles. Like that's just a good thing to know of like general chemistry that you need to apply. So there wasn't much of like, I mean, there was like a couple of isolated questions about different topics like acid base and different things, but it was mostly like, do you know how to do the math? Do you know how to explain the fundamental particles of chemistry? And then there was a lot of nuclear chemistry, which was kind of odd to me because I like at A&M, it's like one course that you take and it's like a 600, 400 level class. And I was like, that's not what I need to know to teach kids nuclear chemistry. But
Right.
um, so I think it was a lot of things that I was like, okay, I can work through this all right, but definitely pretty math heavy. And then, but not like hard math. And then just like understanding what a proton is, what a neutron is, all those things.
Gotcha. Alyssa, what about you in the English realm, ELAR? Because it's not just about writing; it's also about reading, right? What showed up most on your exam?
A topic that was really new to me that I felt like I studied the most in was how to differentiate learning, especially with ESL students, and how what are the best ways to kind of with a student where English isn't their first language, English is a little more difficult of a subject for them, and literacy might be a little more difficult, but how to make sure that they're still being challenged while being mindful of they're going to have a few accommodations with that, but still making sure that they're on track with the rest of the class and kind of like, that was a thing that I had never really had, in my English centered classes, you're not really thinking about that. So a lot of my actual teaching classes with the Aggie Teach minor and those courses came in really like, those are a really big help to me.
So yours is actually pretty interesting in the fact that the ELAR English exam is a mixture, a pretty good mixture of content as well as like how to teach that content, some pedagogical questions in there. I would venture to guess that the others that we have here had a small amount, but it was mostly content on their exam. So yeah, you certainly have some difference in terms of what you see and what prepared you for it. So what did the 240 tutoring prepare you for that?
I think it was nice to be actually asked questions head on and actually have to sit and think. And I did get a few questions wrong that I thought I was like, oh, this makes the most sense in this situation. And then it was like, no, actually, that's a horrible thing to do in this situation. And this is why, and this is why. But it was really nice to kind of, instead of just kind of sitting in a classroom and listening to a lecture, which was also really helpful, actually having those questions aimed at me and then having to deal with the imaginary situation and kind of realizing wow, I do need to learn a lot more in this area. And I do think 240 tutoring helped me a lot with that.
Awesome. Okay. And Julianna, what about math? What were the topics that you saw a lot of? Because math, even though it's built in, it's still a lot of isolated topics, right? Geometry versus
Yeah.
trigonometry versus, arithmetic.
Yeah, my exam had a lot of geometry. I feel like this was the universe out to get me. So geometry is my least favorite topic, actually. And of course, that's the one that showed up the most on my exam. Something about shapes. I don't know, just not my thing. But there was a lot of geometry and a lot of like more complex algebra topics. Um, I thought I was going in to take a high school math test, and that really wasn't the case. It was a little more complex than that. Um, So I was actually in an algebra class at the time during the semester that actually helped me on the exam because it was kind of more complex topics. But the geometry was 240 tutoring, studying only geometry for like 2 hours, but it was a lot of that.
And I feel like that's your experience, but I've also heard of different experiences that it
Yeah.
was very algebra based or it was very, pre-calculus based. But you brought up a good point that the state of Texas in these content exams is not testing your knowledge of high school, right? They have to test your knowledge of a little bit higher than high school in order to make sure that you have the content knowledge necessary to be able to teach high school, right? I mean, if you just know enough to be able to pass a high school, geometry class, that's not going to be good enough for a teacher, right? You need to know a little bit more than that, which is, I think, good, right? We should all be content strong, which is the power of the Aggie Teach program, right? Because you're getting a degree in your field of study. So you're going to be very content strong. Okay. And Parker, what about you? Since there were so many isolated topics, what stood out most on the exam?
So the plurality of questions on the exam, I'm pretty sure if my memory's right, I'm pretty sure it's Texas history. And it feels that way because of all the history majors I talked to. I don't think no one's like, oh, my favorite subject of history is Texas history, except unless they're like 80-year-old people. But so of all the people who were taking the exam with me, they were like, yeah, the Texas history that kicked my butt, man. I could not remember what Jose Seguin did, and I'm like, oh yeah, yeah, you're right. But that it's probably like 190 questions, and there'd be like 40 of them are Texas history. Then the next most would be like 35 are U.S. history, and then after that world, and then a lot of them are just you have about 5 to 10 questions on the economics, sociology, psychology, that kind of stuff. But it's very broad, and a lot of it is like a high school history test. A lot of it is this person is associated with which event. Some of them are kind of the more elevated questions where it's like the Industrial Revolution characterizes which theme of humanity or something like that. And then you would have to figure out what the broader sweeps of that kind of thing are. And then, but a lot of it is just memorization of those facts and stuff.
What I almost hate about that is that, I just had a conversation with a social studies teacher for a different podcast episode about using inquiry in the classroom. That'll happen later in the season, but uh, that's not really how we want to teach, right? That's not really how
Not
we
at
want to
all.
teach history or social studies. That's just memorizing facts and figures. That's not fun at all, not engaging. So, really kind of interesting about how we get tested versus how we're expected to teach. But that's really kind of a difference in the two exams, right? Like we can shift from to the content exam, which is really just about do you know your stuff, to the other exam, which is the what we call the PPRs, the pedagogical and professional responsibilities. There we go, test, and that is really more about the how to teach. And so we don't, since everyone takes the same exam, it doesn't matter if you're teaching kindergarten or AP calculus. Everyone takes the same exam. This will be just kind of everybody, whoever wants to jump in. How has your preparation for that exam been different, the same? What has it been easier? How has this been different from your content exam preparation?
That is the exact opposite of the history exam because that one is here's a set fact. You can get it correct, or there's an easy right answer for it. And I mean, some of them are a little debatable, but there's an easy right answer. And this PPR is like, well, I can see these two being kind of similar. There's a lot of really small details that you have to think about uh, the implications of and the question. So it's a lot more difficult.
Yeah, I feel like also as like our education class is only like a small percentage of what we take each semester. And so I could tell that there were a lot of themes in these exams, like of different educational psychology. That's like, yeah, we were introduced to these things, which is like, yeah, like we need to be because it's on the test. But like, I would assume for an education major, it's much more reiterated of like, you need to know this, and like, here's some more, like questions and exams and like working with this theory or whatever. Like, I think there was like the hierarchies and what is like a good language proficiency. That one was really hard for me because you have to like, the student can say these words in this sort of sentence, like what kind of language proficiency do they have? And I'm like, I don't know. I was like,
Yeah.
that's crazy. But I think it's much more difficult for me for that because I just am like, there's so many different niche subjects that you have to like know that is like, and it's very like interpretive. You're like, this seems like the best answer. And then you're like Alyssa was saying, like, oh, that's absolutely wrong. Like, that's the worst way that you could introduce this topic. And you're like, oh, my bad. It's like, maybe I should just drop out. Like, I don't know. But I think 240 tutoring did help of like, here's what you need to know, and you can keep practicing and whatever. But I was like, I think education majors are probably better set to take something like this.
I was gonna say, especially with the language proficiency levels, that's something that I already done in my content exam because that was, and we talked, like I think a great portion of my content exam was talking about ESL students and kind of just like different, yeah, how I said earlier, differentiated learning. So honestly, I feel like I kind of knew some of the topics already going into the PPR. It just seems like an extension of those topics. And there is kind of a way that the testing works where like there is like a few options where it's like, oh, I don't think this one's that bad, and I don't think this one's that bad, and then you choose like the better of the two, and then it turns out the other one was the better of the two, and it doesn't make sense until you like understand the reasoning. So I kind of have done that process already of really sitting with the question for a longer time and being like, okay, how does their brain work? And it feels more of like, in a perfect world kind of thing. And for me, it took a while to kind of adjust to that kind of questioning, but I feel a bit more prepared for it now.
Yeah, that was the sort of instruction that I got before taking the PPR, which was assume perfect world.
Mhm.
Assume, you have all of the parent involvement, assume you have great administration, assume that you have all the money in the world to do whatever you want, right? So what would be the best option if you could pick anything that you could do? What would be the best option? This is one of the reasons why we typically advocate for students to try to do the PPR prior to getting into their clinical teaching semester, because even though you've already spent a lot of time in the classroom doing observations, you've never really been in there full time, every day, all day, and seeing the realities sometimes that a teacher has to deal with. And if you're going to be assuming perfect world on this test, but then you're going to be experiencing a non-perfect world in clinical teaching, that can sometimes kind of color your ability to take the exam. So that's one thing that we always advocate for, is to try to take it as early as possible. Juliana, what about you? You have anything to add?
Not much. Just to add off what Alyssa was saying, I really had to think through the scenarios a lot more. Like math is, you know the equation or you don't know the equation. It's not really, well, I could justify this and this. It's very different. So I think I have been doing a lot more thinking through each answer choice rather than just starting with the question and figuring it out before like reading through everything and considering all of it.
Yeah, it's a good point. You as a content major, you're not exposed to a lot of these things. And as I alluded to before, this one is a EC through 12 sort of test, early childhood through 12, which means you could end up being asked questions about a third grader, right? You could end up asking questions about a sixth grader, something that's completely outside of your certification area, and you're expected to still know what's going to be the best for that particular scenario, which is odd to me in some respects, but it is how the system is set up. So to kind of give all of you, because I don't think anyone's taken it, right? No one's taken the PPR just yet. You've just been preparing. To give you a little bit of maybe hope, I actually did better on my PPR than what I did on my content test, and I was physical science, so I was physics major. I was pretty aligned with the physical science test, so I did better on my PPR than what I did on the physical science content exam. So it can be done. It is actually a fairly straightforward test. Just think logically through it, as you guys have already mentioned. Okay, so we're kind of getting towards the end of our time here. Let's end with what advice we've already, I think, heard a few tidbits. Right, don't leave until the last minute. Right, but what would be your big piece of advice to give to a student who's just about to start preparing for their content test?
I think to definitely use the resources that are out there. I know A&M just does the 240 tutoring, but I also used other free tests because there's a lot out there. Like you can just Google free exam, whatever, because each exam has a number. So mine was like 235 or something. It was like free mathematics 235 exam. And there was a lot of other resources out there just to get different questions because in my experience, 240 tutoring started to get repetitive. So I was remembering the questions that they were asking rather than the material. So just kind of finding different questions and different styles, I think is a very useful tool to use.
That's a good point. And what I'll link on this particular podcast episode is the Pearson website that has all of their sort of manuals, and that includes the breakdown of like how much each individual topic is going to be tested, what the competencies and standards are, some practice questions. That's actually the only thing I had to use to prepare for my exam, was just what the Pearson manuals that they put out. So it's a good point. There's tons of resources out there now. What else? What are those other pieces of advice?
Really just the 240, if you can run through the flashcards really well, because how the TEKS work, there is an exhaustive list of stuff they're going to ask you. So if you can run through the flashcards and do it well, then I think you are pretty well set for the test.
I was gonna say kind of like similar advice with any test taking is take a lot of practice tests before. I think practice tests were the most helpful for me, but specifically with the ELAR content exam, I would read everything very slowly because some of our questions we're given like a huge chunk of text to read through, a huge scenario to read through. I don't know if it's the same with the other content exams. And I don't think they're going out of their way to try to trick you. 240 tutoring is trying to trick you, but the actual test, I don't think it is, but 240 tutoring definitely is, but it's for a good reason because you really do have to read through it, take notes on those longer questions because it's really easy to forget something or it's really easy to misinterpret what the test is asking you to do.
My advice would just be, at least for the chemistry exam, and I would think maybe other exams, they give you a lot of time to take it. It's very like they're like, you have 5 hours. You're like, I think that was it. But I was like, I don't need 5 hours. But I think with that in mind, just like going in, you're like, you take a deep breath, like you have time to read through everything. Don't try and rush through things. It's kind of a stressful process checking in. It's kind of funny. At least I went to Sam Houston as well. I think Parker did as but you like scan your palm in and they're like, if you have to go to the bathroom, you have to scan your palm out. And I was like, yeah, I have a body double in the bathroom. But like it's just all these different like things that can kind of get you anxious. But I would say just if tests make you anxious, like you have a lot of time, they're not trying to get you disqualified or anything. So I would just say be find out what helps you calm down and just be ready.
Yeah.
So
That's a good point. And thanks for bringing up the idea of the testing center sort of things, right? You should always be aware of what the testing center is going to require, photo ID, all the things, right? What you can and can't bring into the testing center. I'm back in the, age of the dinosaurs where we were, chiseling on clay tablets and things like that. No, it was just it was a on paper test is what I had, right? So I actually was able to take it on campus, but that's not the general, idea anymore, right? You have to schedule with a testing center, and around deadlines, these testing centers can get kind of full, which means you start having to drive further and further out. So I've known people who've had to drive to Houston or drive to Dallas in order to find a testing center that had availability. So, just you got to plan for that, right? Anything else? Any final thoughts before we end the episode?
The 240 tutoring is much harder than the actual content exam. I don't know if it's the same for everybody, but the questions are a lot more elevated and a lot more difficult. And so I walked in definitely over-prepared, which maybe I shouldn't have told people that, so they'll be like me, but it is a lot hard. Like I think on my 240 tutoring exam, I got I think it was like an 84, and then on the content exam, I got what would be equivalent to a 95 or something like that.
Nice. It's good to know, right? I mean, so I think it's good to know that at least students within our program going through our systems are getting the best of everything, right? Your content classes are adding to it, your 240 tutoring preparation is adding to it, your pedagogy classes are adding to it. And so you get everything that's going to be preparing for you, which is why, our particular program boasts such a high pass rate on these exams first try. So, all right. Well, that is all the time that we have for today. Thank you so much to our group of students here for being guests on our podcast today. The Aggie Teach Momentum podcast drops every 2 weeks. So make sure that you are looking for the next episode on Spotify or linked on the Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences website. For more information, you can visit our program website at aggieteachartsci.tamu.edu. That is aggieteach, ARTSCI.tamu.edu. Thanks and gig 'em.